everybody. Welcome to Anatomical Gangster. I'm your host, Sue Hitzman. And today I am so thrilled to welcome my colleague, my friend, and one of the most influential voices in the world of fascia, David Lesondak. David is the brilliant author of Fascia, What It Is and Why It Matters. He's now in the second edition, and it's fantastic, some of the additions that he's incorporated into this book. It's really a must-read that's deepened the global understanding of this vital connective tissue that we now understand as a tissue, an organ, and a system. Now, beyond his work as a body worker and author, David has also been an integral contributor to the Fascia Research Congress, even shaping its impactful post-Congress videos in its early years. David has a touch point and a similar voice than many of our cohorts in the fascial community. He is an educator, an author, and just a brilliant, kind, and loving man. I think you're going to love this conversation. If you are new to this podcast, please subscribe below, share this one with your friends. And if you are curious about diving into the inner workings of what keeps your body in good condition, I think you're going to love this podcast with the amazing David Lesondak. Well, David, thank you so much for joining me on Anatomical Gangster. By the way, I love your podcast, which I do want to talk a little bit about. But first, I want to kind of go back to sort of our connection, which of course is like many of our community, is the conversation of fascia. And this awesome book that is now in its second edition, this journey into understanding fascia, I think is such a great book. This is the one that I tend to recommend. Again, the title says it all.
Thank you for that.
What it is and why it matters. It's just made profound impacts to so many people. So I want you to talk a little bit about this journey that got you to the point where you wrote this book and what originally inspired you to write it.
Okay. Well, I think you used the J word, you used journey, and it was definitely a journey. So I can remember the first time I heard a lecture about fascia. Certainly, I had known about it in the broader sense as a self-described clinical-oriented body worker massage therapist in the 90s. My focus was on getting people out of pain, solving problems. And then in the early 2000s, I heard a lecture by Tom Myers, and it was like a firework went off in my brain. And I went, oh, this is the thing. This is the thing. This is what I've been looking for. This is the thing that will make sense of all the other things. And I completely changed my whole paradigm at that point. So flash forward, and I went to develop my practice after a while at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, which sounds very quaint, but it's actually a system of about a dozen different hospitals in the Pittsburgh region and some others outside the area. And so I'm working in that environment. I had been going to an integrative medicine interest group for a couple of years at another hospital. We met once a month, and I got to give up and give a lecture about fascia and about its clinical implications. There were opportunities to talk about it at the hospital, both public facing and professionally. So anytime there was an opportunity, even to do a lunch and learn on like how to sit properly, and that sort of thing, I would take those opportunities. And during one of them, which was one of the more public facing ones, the head of family and community medicine, Dr. Bernard Bernacki, better was called him Bern, who was an MD and a DO, wandered in. And after the lecture, he came up to me and he kind of put his hand on my shoulder. He's like, son, we need to talk. And Burns started making time for me every 4 to 6 weeks. I'd get like 45 minutes, show up in his office. He was always doing 10 things at once, but asking me questions, fascinated by what I wanted to know. What I knew that he wanted to know more about, he invited me to talk at the Pennsylvania Osteopathic Association dinner banquet thing that year. And the big thing that he said, though, is he was like, son, you got to start writing this down. And I was like, Bern, if I can figure this out, anybody can figure this out. He said, no, not necessarily. Don't sell yourself short. So I had always had the idea that a book like this should exist, but I didn't really start seriously getting down to it until Bern really started kicking my butt about it. And he encouraged me to write a paper, something we would get published in a journal. So I wrote up a very, very dry, very like you would expect reading in a science or medical journal thing about fascia. And I was giving a talk at an integrative medicine conference in Chicago. And after the talk was over, somebody from journal came up and said, do you happen to have that written up as an article? We'd like to publish it. And I was like, oh, right here, let me, So I went home and I revised it, had it to him in 2 weeks. It sat in peer review for 9 months and never got published
Mm,
because he gave it to three different people. One refused to read it based on the title. The other one said, this is great. Everybody should read this. And the third one said, it reads like a medical school lecture. And I went, that's fair, because that's what it was.
right.
It was kind of taking my everything in the kitchen sink hour-long piece and contextualizing it in the written form with references. So the editor's point was, I can't alienate 2/3 of my audience. So I'm going to have to take a pass on this. But that sort of became if not quite the blueprint, it was certainly an embryonic version of that book. And
Mhm.
it was one of the times in Germany where I met Serena, who was one of the editors at Handspring. And then I started selling their books on my website, where I also sold educational DVDs. And that's the other big piece too, Sue, is that for the better part of 8 years, I did not only the anatomy trained dissection videos, but I also did videos of most of the main conferences, one of the international in 2012, but also all of the German ones and a Spanish one. And I got access to all the slides. I edited them to integrate the slides in the right place and put pointers. So it's just like I was just absorbing all this on so many different levels, besides reading the books behind you and behind me.
Yeah, that's where I remember you, when you were doing the videos, and I remember you saying that, like when you actually have to, and I know this in my own work, when you have to edit something and you're doing something with slides, it's now getting absorbed into your mind in a way that really nothing else does it quite like that. And so you're learning again and again and again because you have to keep going back and editing. And
Exactly. And the
yeah,
timing
that's
has
a
to
lot of
be right.
years.
And if I need to understand it enough to know that it makes sense, even if I don't understand all of it.
Yeah.
Or there was one, I remember, a really great lecture by Carla Stecco, and we had an audio problem, but the content was so good. I probably spent 5 hours listening with headphones all the way and putting in subtitles, all those things. And it just gets into your pores. And I've always communicated and written. I mean, I was one of those kids who had a pen pal when I was 12. And when I moved away from home, I wrote letters to my friends. So I've always been working that writing muscle. But it had been in my brain and in my heart and my soul that there needed to be a book like Fascia, What It Is and Why It Matters, though I didn't have the title for it yet. One that told the story of this remarkable tissue and system in a way that you could follow, whether you were a physician or a Pilates instructor. And I was so incredibly grateful to Serena, Mary, and Andrew at Handspring for giving me the opportunity and then leaving me alone to write the book that I wanted to write, and they weren't hovering over my shoulder for that year. I turned it in when I was done, and then that 2 month waiting period was kind of unbearable to get back the feedback from them.
Indeed.
But that's kind of the journey with lots of little exits along the way.
Yeah, and it's an incredible book. And I know you and I share a fond heart towards Tom Findlay, who I think his work and contributions into trying to build fascial awareness was so critical and pinnacle. I recall being on a call with him and Tom Myers and Gil Hadley and a number of other people. And he said, we need to bring researchers and clinicians together to share their work. And it was kind of just a long pause. And I think Tom Myers was the first one to start chuckling. And he goes, I just want to make sure I heard you right. You want researchers to come and share their work with one another. I'm confused, Tom. Have you lost your mind? Are you drinking something? And he said, no, this needs to transpire. And now here we are, 12th International Fascia Research Congress, still trying to bring information and knowledge to people about fascia. So I'm going to pose it to the person who has written a book about it. What is fascia and why does it matter?
Well, fascia is the connective and supportive tissue in the body that permeates and surrounds every bone, every muscle, every organ, and every nerve. As such, it crosses numerous anatomical and physiological boundaries, and it responds slowly to how we use our bodies. So, the way we use our bodies model our connective tissue, which affects our form and our function, but it's also a two-way street. So if you can model it one way, you can remodel it another way, knowing that it's going to be a 6 to 9 to 12 to 16 month process. So this is great in a rehab scenario, which is where I mostly work these days, and or in any other kind of endeavor. And that's, along with certain genetic differences, shortness, tallness, stature, size, body type. But nevertheless, within those boundaries, there's a lot that you can do to change the system. As I tell many of my patients, um, the mechanisms of deterioration are identical to the mechanisms of restoration. It's all about changing the physical and the mechanical input and making it possible for them to move or respond in different ways, and then making them also aware of those things so that they can work on them themselves at home and just in their daily activities.
Yeah, I mean,
And
you're actually just on that point. You are, as you mentioned, you're a hands-on body worker, but you are also a thought leader in fascial research and trying to share information on science. And I love that your way of doing it is always kind of like the 101. You're trying to simplify things down. So how do you merge the practical and the tactile side of your work with that conceptual and scientific aspect so that you get the layperson, your client, to understand maybe what you're working on, or do you try to explain it to the regular people? Regular,
um,
I don't know if that's the word to use, but
okay, well, for all those regular people out there,
those regular people out there who are not
so
fashionados.
the normative, I think, is the word these days. But no, seriously, it really varies. So this is kind of a multi-layer question. So for myself, um, when I began to see the power of working with the body in this way, and I did the anatomy trained structural integration course with Tom Myers, I think I was the third one that they did back in the early 2000s. Um, of course, I was looking at it not just as a formula or a recipe to get from A to B or C or wherever you were going, but I also saw the potential that you could, as good as a formula as it is to follow, that it could be used in so many potential applications. I mean, even from the time that I was a journeyman massage person, I wanted to be working in a medical environment. I just knew that properly wielded, this could affect and change people's lives for the better. And I had this passion to learn as much about it as I could. I needed to really understand it from the inside out so that I could better manipulate and understand why I was getting the results that I was getting inconsistently. And the more I knew, well, the more I do know, it does a lot for your confidence. So if somebody, I get a message from Heather saying so and so wants to come in and see you, but they want to talk to you first. So I call whoever this person is, and they have some very specific questions about their condition. And I ask them a few questions to detail a little bit more. And I can say very confidently, yes, I think we can make a difference here. If it's something a little more complicated, I've had to do that, say, wow, this isn't an easy situation to manage. Oh, and you've had this surgery on top of it. So it's possible, but it is less likely. But let's try and see. Or no, I don't think this is something that I can help you with. But
Mhm.
getting back to the 80% that I can help, which I think is about a fair ratio, people feel that confidence. And I'm not saying, oh, you're going to be like you were before this ever happened, but no, you're going to be in a very different place, in a very different body in 3 to 4 months, and then you're going to go away for a while and come in for a checkup in 3 months. So I feel that confidence in me. Uh, People, and I get this question a lot. Well, this is what I wanted massage to do. And I'm not bashing massage. And I'm like, well, massage doesn't do this. It does other things. Well, why
Mhm.
does it do this? Well, da, 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 da. So the more curious people will ask questions to different levels of specificity. Plus, being in the hospital system, I get doctors and nurses and clinicians coming to see me for their own stuff, and they expect a higher level of explanation. Some very curious normal people want higher levels of specificity or lower levels of specificity. And some people are like, I don't care how it works, just as long as it works.
Right. Yeah.
So
Some people don't want to know. They're like, just if
yeah,
you know how
and
to
that's
fix it,
okay.
fix
And that's
it.
okay. I'm happy. I always tell people, if you have questions, ask them. I'm happy to go into as much or as little detail as you require. So I had spent, let's see, I started, that book came out in October, Halloween of 2017. I sent it to them in December of 2016. So I was writing it in 2016. By then, I had been at UPMC for a little over between 7 and 8 years. So I had been swimming in talking about this to just every kind of person and knowledge bases you could imagine. So I was starting from a really good place and then having done the videos and everything else. So I find as my knowledge grows, my certainty about what is and what isn't possible is better. And I would like to die. Right now, there are two of me in UPMC, me and Deza Pastor, who's awesome. And when she got out of school, I said, "You're hiring her." I want to see 25 of us by the
Mm.
time I'm ready to retire, if I ever do. 50, more than that. That's kind of so. The more that I know, and the more that I can share what I know in a clear way, because it's easy to make it complicated and sound impressive, but if you can't explain it to a 5-year-old or your grandmother, maybe you need to learn it a little bit better or learn how to communicate it a little bit better.
Yeah, and indeed, you can simplify it down. I mean, I've had the pleasure of being in a room with David at one of the fascia congresses in Montreal, and you kind of gave like a good basic fundamental basis of fascia and also communicating it, because I think the fascia community, I always think of us as being very connected, but in recent years, I'm finding there's a lot of camps. There's people wanting to talk about it just in a way, or people are trying to come up with a definition. And
Mm-hmm.
it seems a little difficult. And even in reading your book, it really depends upon how you're looking at it. Are you looking at it under a microscope? Are you looking at it in a cadaver? Are you working on a living human body? You need to be able to span the gamut of that. So where do you feel the fascia education, where do you see it going from your perspective of being an educator?
Wow. I don't know. I got to be honest with you. I don't know. I do know that the more that good quality material is out there, um, the greater the likelihood of adoption. And I haven't had time to read it, but I just saw a piece in Scientific American last week that talked about feeding all this medical data into AI. And I think it, not in the way that it's being commercialized, in the way that the general public hears about AI, but with very specific usages, like trying to sort and sift through medical data. Big fan of Notebook LM. You can feed it a paper and it summarizes it, and you can ask it questions, and it gives you the answers and shows you where it thinks it found those answers. It's a great tool. But they talked about, the gist of the article was that AI is pointing to the need for a more holistic system of medicine. But I haven't had time to really get into the article beyond that, because it's like, oh, people are coming in, and then I've had a week this week with several sick family members and a neighbor and such. So thank you for reminding me that I need to get back to that.
Yeah.
But I would like to see people like myself, people like you in Melt Method, be more a part of frontline care. Rebecca Rothstein, who does Buff Bones, I think is what she
Yes.
calls it. She's working
Lovely.
with Hopkins right now, with people with osteoporosis. And that's just it. It's like the the aches and pains of daily life is something Western medicine is not so good at. And you know what? If you've been out in the garden for 4 hours, like I was this morning, maybe I will pop a couple of Tylenol. That's not always a bad thing. If I'm eating them a couple of times a day for weeks and weeks, that's not so good. But these things exist for a reason. And I tell my patients that too. It's like, yes, I'd like to see you get off your pain meds, but if you're going to go home and yell at your spouse or kick your pet, yeah, maybe you should take it tonight.
Yeah, yeah. And I think you're right about the medical industry. I always try to explain it, especially in the concepts of pain, is that we usually talk about two spectrums of pain. You've got acute and chronic. Acute, you hit your hand with a hammer, you cut yourself, you fall down a flight of stairs, get hit by a bus, you have a very identifiable
That's a
sore.
very bad day, Sue.
Yeah, and that's like, yeah, sometimes just one day for somebody. And then you have this chronic definition, which is usually talked about as being a side effect from a disorder or a disease or maybe a injury, an acute trauma that didn't heal right. And on either side of the spectrum, if you go to a doctor, they're going to do a battery of tests, they're going to give you medication, maybe a surgery to solve the problem. But the gray area in between, I call that sudden chronic pain, that kind of pain you wake up, fell
I
asleep
don't know what I did.
fine. Right.
Yeah.
I fell asleep perfectly fine. I woke up, I couldn't turn my head to the left. It's like, what is that?
Mhm.
And I think fascia plays a leading role. But I wonder, from your perspective, because again, I feel like you have um, collaborated with some of the absolute top scientists and researchers. You've had a stellar career as a clinician. Why is fascia so elusive? And why are there seemingly camps or arguments about what it is? Why do we have so much trouble getting science on board and medicine on board to look at the most abundant material in the body that actually is also playing a role as now being defined as potentially a sensory organ and a stability system, a system? How do we get around that? How do we ever get the medical practice to understand what we're talking about?
Progress is slow. And I leaned over to grab this book,
No.
Dr. Mutter's Marvels, which was one of those really important books in my career. And it's about it's the story of Dr. Thomas Dent Mutter, who has a museum of medical oddities in Philadelphia, which is now people feel it's a little weird and exploitative. But, in the 1860s, 1870s, they didn't have access to the sorts of things that we do. So, if you wanted to study and understand differences in bodies and from person to person, some people collected specimens and skeletons and all kinds of weird things. And Dr. Mutter had a particular passion for treating, I'm just going to say, the grotesque, people who were physically deformed from the standard. He felt a deep compassion towards those people. He really wanted to find ways to help those people. So he had collected this incredible array of different specimens of all kinds of different preserved body parts, organs, skeletons, the whole gamut.
Piecemealed.
He also was one of the people who brought anesthesia to the United States because he was studying it over in France, and he was ridiculed by the establishment at the time. That was crazy. We're not going to use that. You must be out of your mind. And when you read, particularly when I read through this book, I thought, oh my God, I could so easily identify with him going into the conventional medicine at the time with some really out there ideas and some really different training, and also a passion towards helping certain segments of the population that were confusing or people didn't want to deal with, and in just looking at the systems of thought, human ego, people not wanting to be wrong. We still don't have good examples in our culture of people making mistakes in owning them and moving forward. Instead, it's anathema to make a mistake. And I think it just comes down to human nature. And there is the what Robert Schleip likes to talk about, the esoteric camp that likes to get all spiritual about fascia. Okay,
Mhm.
that might be interesting. It doesn't necessarily help me with the person who's here with low back pain. Then we have the quantum biologists like Jaap van der Waal and Gimberto, who see the macrocosm in the tiniest bits of the microcosm. And you've got Neil Thies, who also walks between worlds, who also says, don't mistake mechanism for metaphor, because at different levels of scales, different things behave differently. I mean,
That's right.
honestly, if I was doing the Fascia Congress this year, I would put together a panel where we've got a Neil Thies in the middle, and we've got somebody who's like on the quantum biology tip, and then let's get a real quantum physicist in and a good moderator, and let's just talk about it.
Yeah.
Let's lean into some of these juicier ideas in a grounded way. That's how I would approach that kind of thing.
Yeah, conversations have to happen. Otherwise, you do exist in a vacuum. You're sort of in a silo, only saying, no, this is what it is. I've heard there's a big group
Yeah.
of people who are fascia, bones are fascia. And I'm like, well, you could say bones are connective tissue. They are a connective type of tissue, but are they fascia? And they're like, it's starched fascia. I'm like, I have starched.
Oh, I'm with you on that one. So it's like, wait a minute, where's the collagen in the bone? It's more calcium in the bone.
Yeah, it's like
Well, I
I
got to
think
draw that
we're.
line there.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's it, is you have to you hear all sorts of things and
Yeah.
everybody has an opinion, and you are
Mhm.
100% right. The collegiate world and the medical
Mhm.
world proceeds one
Yeah.
funeral at a time. It's going to take a lifetime for it to get there.
And the human ego, there are people who want to make a name for themselves. There's
Yeah,
people that want to know that after they're gone, they're remembered. There's all kinds of different reasons. So if I can,
legacies.
and I see it in, I one of the things I can't say I've enjoyed, but when I really look at my library over the years, I've realized that a lot of the books that I read that are nonfiction, about medicine or about science or about physics, and quantum mechanics, there's a lot of the history of these things woven into these books, which is something I also try to do with fascia, what it is
Yes.
and why it matters, to give it a bit of a historical context. And you see that's kind of just the way it goes. I mean, there was, in 1930, I can't think of the name of the conference, but it was the big physics conference, and that's where Niels Bohr and Einstein really got into it. And Einstein kept saying, "God doesn't play dice with the universe," and Bohr said, "Quit telling God what to do, Einstein." And Bohr won that one. I mean,
Yeah.
it's and that's the difference for me. Are you trying to get at a deeper truth? Are you trying to come to a different baseline of consensual reality, or are you just trying to be right? And if you're trying to do that, I'm less interested in than if you really want to have a conversation about what is this stuff, and what is it that we can authoritatively say or not authoritatively say. You
Yeah,
know?
what can we do with ourselves? I mean, I think I
Mhm.
said this before we went live. That being in skin is such a gift. It's such an honor, right? Like, I remember being a kid and asking my dad, "How did I get in here?" And he said, "In the room." And I said, "No, in here." And he goes, "In your body?" I don't know. What are you? It's such a weird question. Why do you ask a weird question? Go outside and play, right? And it just is so fascinating to be human and to understand, what is the meaning of life? Why in the hell am I in here? And I think fascia for me, when I really took that deep dive because of my own pain to understand what is plantar fasciitis, and how come my foot's hurting me, and what the hell is inflamed fascia, and there's no exercise for that, that you go down this rabbit hole and realize that for every research paper you read, there's a bibliography and 17 other people are being cited, to which then brings you further down the rabbit hole,
Mhm.
and you
Yeah.
never come back the same. And I look at the human body in a different way because I've learned about fascia, and the educators in our field are so well spoken, far reaching, and really it's commendable what they've done. I just wonder, in all of the years that, of course, as you've said, I mean, it's not like we didn't know about fascia for centuries, but the question here now is, we have technology, we have atomic force microscopy, we have AI. Where is the gap that's allowing the big leap for this research to finally be in the mainstay of the world? Why is it still so unknown to so many
Well,
people?
I see it changing, at least in the medical context. because part of it is for years, these researchers did not get published in the main journals. They
Mm.
weren't in Nature, they weren't in Science. There was recently a very good paper that was published in the Journal of Anatomy about the fascial system. And some people felt certain aspects of it were excluded that should have been included. I think if you're writing for the Journal of Anatomy, and I'm paraphrasing Carlos Stecco here, it's like writing a haiku. There's a certain convention that a haiku has. There's a certain convention that the Journal of
Exactly.
Anatomy has. So we're going to use the language to fit that convention. And it's just the beginning of what will be a more in-depth conversation. There was another major journal in Italy, medical journal. I just saw something about it. I'm not retaining the name because I don't read Italian, but it was about fascia and the nervous system. And this was a big deal. So you're starting to see finally after, I mean, I'm with you, Sue. Here we are in 2025, halfway through almost 2025. I thought fascia was going to be a household name 12 years ago, at
Oh, yeah.
least.
I mean, when
I
my
mean, it's
book
like,
came
I
out,
can't
I was
believe
like,
how
oh,
long
yeah.
this has taken. I can't believe
Yeah,
how
like
long this
I'm
has
going to
taken.
write this book and there's going to be 25 more books after me and we're going to move this
Yeah.
whole thing ahead. And I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
we got
So,
it.
and again, you always find these outliers in the history of medicine. I can recommend a couple really fun books to read like that, besides this other one. But there's always been things that were studied that were outliers. I write about that in chapter 5 about the glial system of the brain,
Absolutely.
because the neurons were a lot more interesting because they were bigger. So they must be more important because they're bigger. And these were guys, right? So I'm just saying. But am I wrong?
That's
Guys in
true.
size. Anyway,
That's so
but
true.
eventually, but there are always some people out there going, well, it must be there for a reason. It must be doing something other than. And the problem is, I mean, once you've done a live tissue dissection, there is no going back to
There
preserve.
is no going back. That's right.
And having done and working in a university environment that still uses preserved embalmed cadavers, the fascia is just this gooey, gloopy beige stuff. Sad beige fascia for sad beige medical students, and and it is the most uninteresting looking stuff ever. Because man, that
Yeah.
heart, I want to check that heart out when you
Yeah.
see
Just
it
chuck the other stuff in the
when
bucket.
you see
Get
it
to
in
those
its
good
living
things.
context. And I can remember, okay, this was also when we first met in, remember we did the freshly euthanized rats?
Yes.
Yeah. And you could actually see the bubbles and foam, if you will, of this
Yes.
tissue and how biodynamic it was.
Yes.
In
It would
that,
be there and then you'd lift it up and it
mhm,
would
yeah,
disappear. And you're like, whoa, whoa, whoa,
yeah,
look at that. It's
yeah.
there. It's not there. It's
Yeah.
there. It's
Yeah.
not there.
And
You know?
now I was really disappointed. One of our universities here just started an osteopathic school, and they are using a virtual anatomy system with a helmet, and it's so, oh, I was waiting to be dazzled and I was not dazzled. The
Mm.
technology is cool, but the presentation of the anatomy is so, oh, it's going to give people very unrealistic
Yeah. It's
ideas
like
of
cardboard.
what's under our skin. Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
it's like, okay, that's kind of cool. I can put my hand up and I can put layers on it, but maybe 10 or 15 years from now, uh, it'll be it'll be better than that. But no matter what model you're looking at, you're gonna have to exclude other things. It was like when they were first when the fascial net plastination project was going on. And for your listeners who aren't familiar with that, this was a attempt to do a fascial only body rolls type head to toe anatomical exhibit. And they realized that they couldn't do it because what would hold the fascia up?
Mm.
Right? Right?
Mm.
I mean, they thought, oh, we could have this, it'll be three-dimensional, we can shine lights through it and you'll see the whole thing. But it's the
Mm.
fascia that helps hold us up with the bones. So that's why Freya, the full body one, was this, and I'm saying this in the best possible light, a pastiche, a model of about 200 different aspects of fascia, the fascial system, and little windows into different parts of the fascia, because there was no way they could do the beautiful thing that they had in their head. And she's still astonishing. She's still astonishing. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm
And I think also, when you think about fascia, I always
awestruck.
Yeah, I'm always fascinated with this idea that, isn't it incredible in the superficial fascia, it's so sponge-like and kind of nooks and crannies, and then in others it's more membranous, and then in others it looks like a grid, and there's so many
Mhm.
pieces to it. And again, by way
Yeah.
of the incredible design of the human body, that this very uh, whole body system that is so underappreciated for so long is finally out there. And I think that Freya and that entire plastination project has been really eye-opening for people to see something that's usually chucked in the bucket and not spoken about
Mhm.
at all when it comes to anatomy.
And when you go to Berlin and you go to the Permanent Body Worlds exhibit, and you don't just see Freya, you see an entire, I'm going to call it a wing because it's bigger than just a room. You see an entire wing separate from the rest of the body exhibit, completely devoted to fascia.
Hmm.
And it's like, yeah, baby, yeah. So it's happening, and maybe by the time we're going, hey Sue, remember 2010, maybe we'll be like, it's finally there, people get it, now it's time for us to leave the stage. It might
And
take
I
that
hope
long.
we don't talk like that, but you're probably right.
I
You know,
talk like that now.
you
But
know,
Bern, I remember. Okay, so way back, you were asking me about how this all started, and I was talking
yeah,
about my mentor at the hospital, Bern Bernanke. And I remember the day he looked at me, he said, son, sometimes pioneers die pioneers.
yeah.
And I was like, ooh.
That's
It's like, I
hard.
know you don't want to hear that. I'm like, you're right. I don't want to hear that, but you're not
No,
wrong.
it's true. It's true. And you've also brought out such great interviews in your podcast. Can you talk a little bit about some of the highlights and maybe who have been some of your favorite people that you have interviewed? Because you've really interviewed so many pioneers and fascinating human beings on your podcast. Who's your fave?
Thank Oh, you're trying to get me in trouble, Sue. Why didn't you say I was your favorite? See, yes,
How about
I'm
three?
not playing that game.
I don't
Um,
think I've ever been on your I was never on your podcast.
you know what? That you are correct.
Never.
That is a failing on my part.
No,
Because
well, you have so many great people to interview.
but
There's
it
a list
was
of real educators. So who's
it was the 2020s.
yeah.
I made the decision to do the podcast in 2018 at the Berlin Fascia Conference because I wasn't happy with the level of discourse that was available in the podcast format. I just heard one too many. That was too simplistic or not robust in their follow-up questions, shall we say. So I thought, God, again, there has to be something to split the difference here. And if I'm a good host is thinking about the listener and making sure the listener doesn't get lost.
Hmm.
So it's like, okay, I think I can do that. And I spent, a long time. The next year, I spent a lot of the first half of 2020 uh, listening. I mean, there were podcasts that I like. What do I like about them? Why do I like this hosts? How do they make this so entertaining that I even want to listen to something that's not about, they're not talking to anybody I even know about or care about. But wow, they made that interesting for me. So I kind of did my research that way. And then I started with people that I knew so that I could get comfortable.
Hmm.
And I remember my first litmus test because I had about 8 or 10 of the podcasts in the can before I put it out there because I didn't want to I wanted to have a backlog. So, I wasn't constantly racing against having one out next week. But my first big litmus test was getting James Nestor before he blew up.
Uh-huh.
And that was
What a great book, Breathe. That's
and
just
I,
one of the
oh my
most
God, I
fantastic
was
books.
so, it was about
Give
6
me a
o'clock
break.
at night. It was dark outside. I've been working all day. This was not the way I wanted to do it, but that's when he could do it. And a physiotherapy buddy of mine said, it sounded like two guys talking over beers. And I'm like, oh my God, thank you. Because that was the vibe I was going for. I wanted it to be super conversational. And I wanted to not just be a promotional thing for the book, but delve into some nooks and crannies, and maybe talk about some things that aren't in the book or in a way that's presented differently in the book. And that's with everybody. And that's the thing is, depending on who your guest is, it takes a lot of research time with some guests. James was one of them. I probably had 5 pages of notes. We maybe got through a page and a half because you got to follow the conversation where it goes.
Yes.
Same thing with another highlight was Sutter. He's Paul Sutter. He's a quantum physicist. And I thought, everybody wants to talk about quantum biology. Let's actually talk to a physicist about it and let's get
Yeah.
their take on it. And I read an article of his. I pitched him because it was very obvious from his website that if he was going to come on, I had to send not just, hey, will you come on the podcast? I got to pitch him an idea and I have to make it appealing. I spent hours and hours listening to his podcast on different things and really trying to understand his perspective outside of my own hobby reading on the subject. And that was like start to finish. And that was one where, like, yeah, I could have talked to him for another hour, but you reach a
Yeah.
point where it's like, oh, that's the place to stop because we got somewhere. That's good. We're just going to leave it there. And that's something you kind of pick up after a while. Carla, who was not a formal guest on the podcast, but I was interviewing Carla Stecco for my next book coming out next year. And I recorded the conversation for note purposes. And when I was re-listening to it, I'm like, wow, there's some really good stuff here. And I asked her, could I take segments of it, kind of set it up with a narration in between, kind of explaining things? Because I think people would really be interested. I mean, I thought she was like, when we were five playing with crayons, she was like 5 years old playing with knives and scalpels. No, she didn't do her first dissection to her early 20s. I
Yeah.
mean, her story was so not what I was expecting,
Yeah.
that I wanted to share that with the world. So, and then there's, the usual suspects. I spent a two-part podcast with Jaap van der Wal, which was a really interesting discourse into some really deep ways that he was thinking. Katerina Feda on fascia and hormones. That was a more recent one. I got to be honest with you. I haven't done one in the last 18 months, almost 2 years now, because I've been working on two big book projects.
Yes, and you do this fascia function in medical applications is coming out. We're not going to talk too much about that on this podcast, but when it comes
Uh-huh.
out at the
You
end of
could
the
mention
year,
it. Mhm.
I want to talk a little bit about this because this, I think, is huge to put fascia function in medical applications. That just sounds like something all of us should read. This is pioneering for sure.
Well, oh yeah, and before we get off that, Robert Schleip is always a great guest on the podcast because I have
Yes.
to listen. And also Neil Thies. I have two with Neil. I have two or three with Robert, and Neil is always an amazing time. And Robert, I have to go back and listen to myself 2 and 3 times over to get all the things that he drops just casually in all the
Oh, yeah.
conversation. But getting back to Dee's book, another route. So part of it, Don Ingber would talk about it being serendipity. He has talked about his career being about serendipity. I talk about it following the breadcrumbs. But there was a Ingrid Kolstad who wrote a book on physical therapy, liked fascia, what it is and why it matters, and said, I'm doing a second edition of my metabolic therapies in physical medicine. Could you do a chapter on fascia? And I thought, well, I've never done that before. Sure. I like doing things I've never done before. So that was a big challenge, but I managed to get it through a number of stages of editing. The chapter was popular, and then the book, Taylor and Francis came to me and said, could you give us a whole book like this? And I thought, yeah, okay, let me get back to you. And I sent them the proposal with the outline, and it was the weirdest thing, Sue, because they said, well, this is very unusual. I said, what? They said, well, you have 75% of the authors for your chapters already committed. Usually people start on their outline and then go get the authors. I'm like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
if I can't guarantee that I'm getting Carla to write about anatomy, Antonio Stecco to write about physiology, Robert Schleip to write about the nervous system, and on and on and on and on, I'm not doing this project. And it was really the goodwill that I had built up with them. Gimberto, who was in the second edition, who was not able to get done in time for the first edition. These were people that I had met videotaping these conferences year after year and earning their respect, not leaking their slides, not putting their stuff on the internet, cutting out the part that they wanted cut out because it was unpublished. We built up that respectful relationship so that when I came knocking and saying, could you, would you, to a person, they all said yes, unless there
Yeah.
was a time constraint involved. So incredibly fortunate. And again, what are we going to call it? Well, it's like I was saying earlier, people come to me with low back pain. Most of them, by the time we're done, don't have the low back pain anymore. People go to medical doctors a lot for pain, chronic pain conditions. And that's what I do day in and day out. That's what a lot of my colleagues do day in and day out. To me, these are medical applications. So I wanted to call it what it is.
Mhm.
And that's where the title came from. And again, I feel privileged that they were interested enough after only 4 years to engage me on doing a second edition. The first edition came out in September of 2020. Not a good time. Was not a
No,
good time.
no.
And this time I had like the recourse to really go, okay, let's not all the chapters that we didn't have the first time around. And I finally got the yoga chapter that I was craving that was not possible for the first edition. There's a great chapter in there by a physician and osteopath from Canada on Tai Chi. Gimberto has a chapter. He basically gave me his life's work in 8,200 words. We had a lot of editing back and forth on that,
Mm.
and
He's
16
so
pictures,
fantastic.
a
So
bunch of
brilliant.
a bunch of QR codes. I mean, people were so generous with wanting to share the information, and I kind of had to herd and contextualize it to make sure that it would suit the audience. I think anybody interested in fascia would find it a good time, but I really wanted it to appeal to frontline physicians, healthcare workers, nurses, PTs, OTs, and give it that imprimatur. So again, success sometimes builds on itself, and I've learned when somebody gives you an opportunity, as much as as much as possible, as challenging it is, you got to grab on. You got to say yes. I'll find a way to make this happen. And
Yeah.
like I said, I've been very very fortunate, and I've got great professional friends and colleagues that help me make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough when you have to say no to big projects. I've had that experience a number of times in my career, and most of the time it's because of death or life that gets in the
Oh
way.
yeah, 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 yeah. You've got
You just move on and think, well, that's just not what the universe asked of me,
the
and you have to
the
think it's
the
passing.
the chapter in the physical therapy book that begat this book. I said yes to in the middle of helping take care of my mother-in-law who was in the last 5 months of her life. And I remember the editor sitting back to me going, "This is
Yeah.
crap." And I'm thinking, "Are you kidding? That was really good. I remember writing that." And then I read it through. I'm like, "Oh my god, it is crap."
Yeah, yeah.
My brain was not working as well because of having to take care of a family member
Mm.
who was living in our home at the time. And as much as I thought I was splitting my attention well, not so much. So
Yeah.
I had to kind of go away for a couple of days and really sit there and not have any distractions. That's the hard, and that, Sue, the hardest
Oh,
part
yeah.
of
Is
writing
just
is not
locking
being
yourself in
distracted.
a room,
Yeah, yeah, not
turning
letting
off
yourself be
all of
distracted.
the
Yep.
emails, the dinging, the this and the
Mhm.
that, and to
Phone
just sit
goes
and
outside,
write.
all of it. Yeah. So you're
Yeah.
not distracted.
I know very much what it's like to write a book, and it does take a tremendous amount of your life and dedication. And I'm really grateful that you took the time in your life to write Fascia, What It Is and Why It Matters. I think that this will continue
Thank
to
you. Thank
be
you.
an absolute bestseller around the world.
It's wonderful
It's
to have written
necessary.
something that's actually a perennial and it's still selling well 8 years and two editions later.
Yeah, it's really amazing. It's a notable book for sure. So, David, we're at the end of our time. I mean, I could sit here and just hang out
I
with you.
know we barely got
I just love
you
your
had all
voice,
those
by
wonderful
the
juicy
way.
questions.
I
Go
could
ahead.
just I could just listen to your voice all day. I feel like I've been meditating for an hour. I'm so zoned into your sound. It's awesome. But here's my question to you. So I ask everybody this question because I think that in my life this has happened where you learn something in life and it literally changes your life what you learn. So if you could tell somebody something that you've learned in your life that completely changed your experience of living, that changed how you view the human experience, and if they knew it, maybe it would change their life for the positive, what would it be?
Wow. Wow, that's a big question. That's a big question. Uh, the thing that comes to mind is, and it kind of alludes to something we were talking about earlier, and um, it's going to take longer than you think. And to not give up because it's taking longer than you think. There's just like in any creative endeavor, and I don't just mean art here, but writing a book or uh, trying to fulfill a vision of yourself moving forward in a particular context, whether that's a spiritual context, a professional context, a family context. Um, there's what you see, and then there's what happens along the way. And sometimes what happens along the way provides some very necessary detours that enrich you in a way when you come back to the main part of the path that you couldn't anticipate. But it's gonna slow your time frame down a little bit. So I think sometimes people get really caught up in this artificial timeline of their own making about how long something is going to take and where they're going to be by a certain point in time, and maybe not. So it's okay if it takes longer than you want it to. However, when it comes to doing something on a schedule like writing a book, deadlines are good because it helps you prioritize.
Indeed, indeed. Yeah, I think it was I spoke with somebody else in a podcast, and I recall Saint Augustine, I think it was the one who said it on the process of time. He said, I know what time is, but when you ask me, I don't. And time is such a precious thing. We don't have enough time. This is taking too much time. What time is it? I don't have time for this. So we're always throwing time
This is
out
no
there.
time to talk about
There's
time.
no time to talk about time exactly. So, but I'm just so grateful for the time that I've had to be able to spend with you here today and for you to share this. What are you showing me? What is this book?
Oh, just one more little mind blower. This was a book I read probably in 2005, um, called A Sideways Look at Time by Jay Griffiths.
Hmm.
uh, an exercise in Dharma, poetry, and philosophy. This is one of this book was just such a mind bender for me on so many levels. So I'm just giving it a plug. I'm just giving it a plug.
I love that. And I love that, and I so appreciate when people also share those books that really made them think something different. And I
Yeah,
have
and that
much.
that's one of those ones like I want to go back and read it again because I'm not that person anymore. So how will I take it in now?
Yeah.
Kind of thing. So anyway, Sue, this has been great. Thank you so much for inviting me on the podcast.
Oh, I'm so, so grateful to have the time with you, David. And for all of you guys listening, I hope that you enjoyed this podcast. I hope that you will check out David's book and his podcast and everything that he does to contribute to the world. Deep appreciation. Follow us, make sure that you subscribe, reach out to people and tell them about the podcast, and keep your mind open. Stay healthy, stay well, and we'll see you on the next podcast soon. Thanks for joining in. Well, I hope that you enjoyed that conversation with David Lesondak as much as I did. I hope that you check out his book, Fascia, What It Is and Why It Matters, because it certainly matters to your overall health and resilience and your longevity. And I hope that you check out his podcast and join me next week for another enlightening podcast with another brilliant mind. Stay healthy, stay well, and we'll see you all next week.